Thanks, Nikki. Um, so my name's Brian Baker, and Nikki has asked me for the first 30 minutes of your time together to open this event. And I am an Episcopal priest. I am at the tail end of my priesthood career and have been doing, Nikki and I met, and well, I'll tell you in just a moment. So 5 years ago, 2015, my 23-year-old hippie daughter came into 2 tickets to Burning Man at the last minute. And she'd never been before. She always wanted to go. And she asked me, her old Episcopal priest father, to go with her. And we had been estranged for a while. So this was a big bid on her part for us to reconnect. And as a dad, this was an offer I couldn't refuse. But at Burning Man, Burning Man is a gift-giving economy. You come bringing gifts and offering freely gifts. There's no money exchanged. And I had to wrestle with what my gift could be as a priest. Like, what would have integrity to me as a priest that would be received as a gift and not an imposition by people who weren't religious, and also wouldn't be triggering by people who'd been wounded by a shitty church. And so what I came up with was a blessing. And I would like to offer this blessing to start our time together, sort of as a centering and a grounding, and also as an introduction to who I am and what I'm about. So I invite you to just sit comfortably, take a breath, come into your body. The world now is too dangerous and too beautiful for anything but love. I bless your eyes so you see God in everyone, your ears so you hear the cry of the poor. May your lips be so blessed you speak nothing but the truth with love, and your hands so that everything you touch is a sacrament. May your feet be so blessed you run to those who need you. And may your heart be so opened, so set on fire, that your love changes everything. Amen.
Amen.
I believe that I believe that your love can change everything. And I think sort of our purpose on this planet is to sort of join God or the cosmos or whatever in loving the world into wholeness, in participating in sort of bringing the birthing of a new creation of love. And I think there are a couple of things that get in the way of us doing that. And I want to just briefly this morning touch on 2 of those things that get in the way of us walking through the world from our sort of loving place. So the first, when my daughter was born, and I held her in my arms and looked at her for the first time, something happened to me. And I felt a love that I knew would never end. And no matter what she did as a child, I could not stop loving her. And she did a lot. And I just couldn't stop. I never looked at her through the lens of her misdeeds or her childhood cruelties. I always looked at her through the lens of like this beautiful, sparkling human gracing the planet. And I wonder why I don't look at myself that way, and why we don't look at other people that way. I know for me, it's the mistakes that stick. I'll be having a conversation with a group of people, and I'll say 10 amazing, funny things and one stupid thing. And then I will leave that conversation. And in my mind, I'm no longer, Brian Baker, sparkling human. I am he who says stupid things. And I'll just beat myself up like for hours afterwards. You're so stupid. I can't believe you did that. I mean, in their minds, they probably didn't even notice, but in my mind, it creates this whole sense of my identity. I am he who says stupid things. And I will beat myself up in ways that I can't imagine ever saying out loud to another human. There's that voice inside, and that voice also turns to other people. I mean, in an instant, someone does something, someone cuts me off in traffic, and I don't think, what an interesting driving choice. I think, what an asshole. Like, and we immediately move them into this category that's not even human. And we do it with groups of people, with people that, are on the different political spectrum from us. And it's not that we disagree, it's that we disdain. We move ourselves and people into this category that's sort of less than human, that then allows us to think horrible thoughts or even do horrible things toward them or toward ourselves. Now, you can make the case that this is the fatal flaw in humanity. Like, this is the thing that's going wrong, this judginess. And in my mind, judginess is one of the two things that gets in the way of us living in love. And I think that was the point. This judginess is the point of the story of Adam and Eve, where this creation myth, where that's written 3,000 years ago to answer one question, which was what went wrong? Like, why are we in such a mess? And the wisdom embedded in this story 3,000 years ago, I think, is pretty remarkable. In this story, God creates the heavens and the earth. God creates everything, creates the first humans, and gives them everything they need to thrive. God says, here, have fun. Just don't do one thing. The one thing if you do this, it's going to make everything go off the rails, is eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of, like grasping for a particular kind of knowledge. Now, if you were writing that creation myth and you were a pacifist, maybe you would say the knowledge of violence or warfare. Like, have fun, enjoy the garden, just don't grab for the knowledge of violence or warfare. Or if you're a Puritan, you could say sex, right, or whatever. But the author of this story wrote the knowledge of good and evil. Don't grab for the knowledge of good and evil. And in the story, the moment they bite this fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the first thing they do is they look at their pure, unclothed forms. And they go like this. They hide themselves in shame because they judge themselves. This form that God just made and said, this is awesome, woohoo! They look at that and go, fuck, like, we're horrible, and cover themselves up. And then the author says, every day God would go in the garden and Adam and Eve would run out and say, hi, God, and they'd hold hands and chat and go for a walk. And this next day, God comes and they don't. They hide in the bushes. And they say, we can't come out, we're naked. And God's heart breaks. And Adam blames Eve, and Eve blames the serpent. And here we are, practically, we can't even talk to one another. Because there's this thing in our brain that pushes us to always, like, we have to make decisions between this or that, but we take it a step further and we judge something as evil, as disdainful, as dirty, unclean, untouchable. And we include that judgment in ourselves as unclean and untouchable. And it just creates this division and this divisiveness that is not holy and is not of God. And the invitation, like one big invitation on our spiritual journey, is to learn how to be less judgy, to learn how to be more open, more accepting, more loving, to look at ourselves and other people, not through the lens of the worst they've ever done, but the best that they could be, to learn to look at ourselves the way a loving parent would look at us, the way I look at my daughter. Now, there are a couple of things that can help with that, help with turning that judginess down. One is paying attention to that voice of that inner critic. Like when you do something and that inner critic starts beating yourself up, noticing it, because sometimes like we're halfway to a bloody pulp before we even notice we've been pummeling ourselves. So train yourself to notice that voice sooner. And then to know that that's not the voice of God. That's not the voice of truth. That's something else. But you don't have to listen to it. And then maybe even replace that voice with something else. Create for yourself a mantra that you pull out. I was teaching a group of Buddhists a number of years ago about this inner critic. And one of them came up to me and said, whenever that happens, I say a Hail Mary, which I thought was really sweet coming from a Buddhist. But it doesn't have to be religious, but replace that voice with something else. It could be, you're not the boss of me. Or it could be, I am marvelously and wonderfully made. Or anyway, to have something handy to replace that with. And the second thing that I think is super helpful is to allow yourself to believe that everybody on the face of the earth is doing their best. Everybody is paralyzed. Everybody struggles with fear and anxiety and this judginess and either the crappy way we were raised or the bad information we're getting now on the internet or something. But to allow yourself to believe that everybody is doing the best that they can. And in fact, it's kind of a miracle that they're as good as they are, given who knows what they're having to, baggage they're having to carry around with them. I have a friend of mine whose Granny Barb used to say, everyone's doing the best that they can, and sometimes their best is pretty shitty. Sometimes my best is pretty shitty, but I'm doing my best, and we really can't expect anything more than that from anybody. So those are a couple of strategies that can invite us to move through the world in a way that lets our love flourish and pour out and guide us. One other thing I want to mention, let me do a time hack here. One other thing I want to mention that for me is a primary inhibitor of living in love is fear. Everyone I know is inhibited in some way by fear. Fear of not being enough, of not having enough, of what might happen in the future, of their own inadequacies or whatever. But this sense of fear, and we know, that when you're operating out of fear, you start to go like this, right? Your horizon shrinks, your options shrink, your creativity shrinks. And we've seen culturally fear be weaponized these past years. And so for me, the judginess and the fear are sort of like the 1-2 punch of things that keep us from really being human with one another. And one of my favorite teachings about fear comes from T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. In his 7 Pillars of Wisdom, he talks about, he says, before you go into the desert, the night before you go into the desert, you can't sleep because your imagination is just going wild with all of the things that could possibly go wrong. You can get lost, you can run out of water, your guides can turn on you and attack you. that you can get attacked by wild animals. I mean, it's just, you just can't sleep. And then the next day when you go into the desert, one of two things happens. Either it's not nearly as bad as you imagined. You know, everything goes reasonably well, and you just wasted so much of your energy dreaming about all the possibilities that could go wrong, and they don't materialize. However, the second thing that could happen is it could be far worse than you ever imagined. Like, you weren't creative enough in thinking of the shitstorm that's going to face you when you go out to the desert. But, he writes, if that happens, you find within yourself resources you never knew existed. If that happens. And, you know, we all have the thing we're afraid is going to happen. And what T.E. Lawrence says is, if that happens, even if it happens, like, live your life, and even if that thing happens, whatever it is that you're afraid of, if that thing happens, even if that thing happens, you're going to find resources within yourself to make it through that thing. Or you'll have resources in the connections you've made in other people. Like if right before you launch this really important web-based experience, you go in for eye surgery, and it doesn't recover in a day like you were told it's going to recover, but it's actually going to take 3 weeks to recover, you're going to find resources within yourself and within the community for everything to be okay. Now, to be a little religious, although everything I'm saying, which comes from my religious tradition, really doesn't require a religious tradition. But in my religious tradition, we have this notion of resurrection and crucifixion. And in my mind, God isn't in the business of protecting the bad thing from happening to us. If that was God's job, God's doing a horrible job. But rather, God's job is in creating life out of situations that look like death. The message isn't don't be afraid, nothing bad's going to happen. It's don't be afraid, the bad thing probably will happen, and you're going to be okay. You're going to be a new creation on the other side of it, that all of these broken pieces that you think are going to be the end of you are going to somehow be used to create something new. And I believe this is true universally. Like, I believe that cosmically, that the universe is in the business of creating life. And like, after all of our little tragedies and death, something new comes out of it. And we have a choice of living our life like this because we're afraid of the bad thing happening, or living our life like this, knowing that even if the bad thing happens, we're going to be okay, and we'll even be a new creation on the other side of it. Anne Lamott says that if it feels like a bad ending, it's not the end. Or God bats last. She's a big baseball fan. You know, that even after the horrible thing that happens, that there is new life on the other side of it. And that doesn't mean the horrible thing isn't going to suck, but it's not the end. So my invitation is for you to imagine living your life in a way with your inner critic. Sort of, you may not be able to muzzle your inner critic, but maybe you can turn the volume down from 11 to 7, or even 9 would be an improvement. And to be able to also let down or lower, decrease the voice of your fear that's preventing you from living life and loving life and others to its fullest. So that's what I have to offer for you this morning as you're beginning your grand journey